And if anyone has any questions as we move through the presentation, feel free to type those in the chat. I will be monitoring those, and I'll either get you an answer now, or if I can't answer now, we'll get you on a follow-up list so that we can provide an answer to you. Today, Kyle Nowak is going to be presenting. We're scheduled for 2 hours. I'm not sure if we'll take quite all of that, but if we have some time at the end and there are additional questions, we can address those as well. And with that, Kyle, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, Cheryl, can you still hear me all right?
Yes, I can.
All right. If I do pause in the middle, I am battling a little bit of a cold. I think I've said that at least on one other one of these before. So I apologize if I suddenly cut out for 5 or 6 seconds. I might be sneezing. I don't want to do it for everyone on the call. So thank you guys very much for joining today. I certainly don't think we'll take all of the 2 hours. My goal would be to try to move through this quickly, but we want to highlight some key points where we've had some issues, where some changes have occurred, and just kind of overall give you a broad kind of foundation and base for requests for quotations. So with that in mind, today's presentation, we're not going to cover some specific RFQ instances like, projects or legislated fundings. If you use RFQs and then a third-party bidding service like Bid Express, if you have questions like that, we'll take those offline like Cheryl had indicated. I apologize that we had moved this a couple weeks back. If you're here, you're probably aware that we've had a few hiccups around some vendor communications and emails, especially with RFQs, and we'll discuss that a little bit more here in a few slides. So kind of like the similar format for what we've done with the previous presentations is we are going to kind of bounce back and forth between the presentation and then D365 and do some demonstrations, mainly around creating an RFQ from a purchase requisition, publishing, amending, and canceling those RFQs, viewing and responding to vendor questions within D365 and why that's important, and then ultimately unsealing, reviewing, and awarding the bids. And then as Cheryl said at the end, we'll take questions, kind of review some of those common errors and issues that we run into with RFQs, and do a little bit of a recap. So the main reason that we use requests for quotations is that, it's more or less the vehicle that allows, our procurement system, and this is per code 32902, to maximize our purchasing value of public funds and also provide, fair and equitable treatment to all persons involved in the purchasing process. So we are looking to basically receive the best price for our goods and services through competitive bidding, and that allows us, or that allows for the most equitable and fair opportunity for all of our vendors. And RFQs are really the way that we're going to get that accomplished. The next point here on the slide is based on the dollar amount of our request for quotation. This is how it's going to be classified as either informal or a formal bid, or a formal advertisement. So anything under $50,000 is going to be considered an informal bid, and anything over 50 will be a formal bid. There was there were numerous important code changes that happened to code 329 that went into effect on the 2nd of January. But the most important for us, or for requests for quotations, is that now informal bids must be published for at least 5 days, and formal bids must be published for at least 21 days. So as far as users with as far as advertising with your goods, keep in mind that 5 days for informal ones that you're going to do an RFQ with. And if you're going to be advertising services that are going to be in excess of 50, keep that formal bid in mind as well. So here is just a slide and a table that shows the differences between formal and informal. I'm not going to really highlight or talk too much about these, but just important note is that, you know, informal versus formal does not necessarily mean department versus procurement. So it's anything less than $5,000 with goods is something that we will handle at the department level. In excess of $5,000, that will go to procurement. However, that is still informal until we get to or exceed $50,000. One thing to note with services, so if you're going to be advertising for services and your services are going to be in excess of $50,000 and it's going to be a formal RFQ, there are a number of different things that you're going to need to address and to satisfy if you're doing a formal request for quotation. So we would encourage users, if it's not something that you do often, to reach out before you would put that RFQ out and publicly advertise it. That way we have an opportunity to help you get it right prior to getting that out there and make sure that we satisfy all those requirements for formal bid or formal RFQ. I apologize. So here what you're seeing is kind of a workflow chart or an example of what the workflows are for an RFQD and an RFQP. So the differences between what will happen if you're going to do it yourself or if you're going to send it through for procurement or to have them handle your PR to PO. The important thing to note is if you're doing an RFQD, so if you're going to be handling your request for quotation through the department, you as a user are responsible for that workflow through getting your purchase order submitted to workflow and then ultimately into a confirmed state. So when you award your RFQ, the workflow is not complete. What you have done is you have populated your purchase requisition, and that purchase requisition needs to be continue its workflow through approval. Once the purchase requisition is approved, you need to release that PR to a PO, and then we need to add a workflow, add a reason code, any kind of a supporting documentation that we might need to add, and then submit that to workflow, and we'll see that process today.
And Kyle, just real quick, there was a clarification point that I wanted to bring up. For the formal and informal threshold, someone asked that we just clarify that that is pertaining to goods and services. That doesn't necessarily apply for the construction contracts, right? Those are kind of their own separate beast, if you will.
Correct, and I don't want to speak to it and be incorrect, but I believe the threshold for construction is 100,000. But I will not say that with authority, but that does not speak to construction. That is for goods and services only.
Great, thank you.
So what we have here in this table is going to be the required elements of an RFQ. I'm not going to go over every single one here. There's a couple things to note is that we're going to be primarily focusing on creating an RFQ from a purchase requisition today. There are some fields that are derived from the purchase requisition. So if we go to create our RFQ, we aren't going to be able to adjust those fields in the RFQ. So we want to make sure we address those in the PR ahead of time. One specifically is a delivery date, which is actually, I believe, derived from requested date in PR, and we'll go through there. But we want to make sure as a user that we're trying to do our best to give an accurate delivery date or requested date for the goods or services that we are going to put out to bid, because ultimately the vendors are going to see this in the RFQ. So if it is just defaulted to, say, the day that we're putting this out to bid, then we're not giving an accurate estimate of when we might need these goods or the services provided from a vendor. And that's an important piece of information that we want them to have when they're placing their bid. So something to keep in mind as well. And then the other thing I have noted here is alternates. We should accept alternates in our RFQs unless there's a legitimate business purpose for a reason why. Maybe you're purchasing more of an existing product or a matching product or good that needs to be replenished. That's why we can't accept an alternate. But in general, we should accept an alternate on all of our lines. Just a few more required elements here. Of note, please make sure when you're attaching documents that we make that at the header level. They can be found by vendors if we put them in at the line level, but it's easier and it's a best practice if we just attach those at the header level of our RFQ. And we want to make sure that we have that restriction set to external. And I'll show that to you for an attachment. But if we don't have it set to an external, it's not going to show up for the vendors to see when they go to look at the RFQ. Last thing is that the lines should have a quantity, a unit, and a unit price. Even if the unit price isn't necessarily accurate or representative, although it should be, of what you expect the bids to be, the vendors aren't going to see that, but it's going to, it can cause issues with getting your RFQ published to the vendor services portal. So we always want to make sure that you have a quantity, a unit, and a unit price in your lines to make sure that all of your lines successfully make it to the vendor services portal. All right, so we're going to jump over and we're going to look at creating an RFQ from a PR. So I've already created an RFQ or created a PR that we're gonna jump from and work off of. But in doing this, I do want to highlight a few things when we're creating our purchase requisitions ahead of time. I did say I'm not going to talk about projects, but I do want to mention here one thing with projects. If your funding involves a project, the project must be included every step of the way. So if we're going to do a PR to an RFQ that is eventually going to end up in a PO, if we're using a project, that funding or that project needs to be identified here right at the start. I'm not going to put it in, but keep that in mind if you're using a project. This is PR 101, so this isn't just for RFQs. If you make contract purchases as well, this is a really important thing to note. When you open up a PR and you're going to start your creating and add lines to it, the very first thing that you want to do is add a reason code or a reason. If you don't add a reason here, it doesn't show up automatically in your line level. So there's reason code or reason justification at your header level and your line level for purchase requisitions. The reason is, and we'll see here at the end, is that a purchase requisition can have multiple different vendors and multiple different workflows in it. So the workflow actually occurs at the line level. And if we don't add the reason code at the header level to begin, it's not going to auto-populate down here. And if I just add a line, I'll take a second to get a drink of water here. Okay, so we add our line in here. And you can see there's no reason code here at the line level. There's still not one here at the header level. So now I come back in and let's say I add my line reason code here at the header level. And I go about trying to maybe add a second line. This is the prompt that you will see. I would say in the majority of situations where we have an error down the line, users do not update the reason code. So if you forget to add your reason code at the header level to begin with, and you add it after the fact, you're going to get this submenu pop up. You want to select yes. If you don't select yes, the reason code is not going to show up here at the line level. If you do, it will populate. So that's just an important note that I wanted to show everyone there. That's not just for RFQs. That's a best practice for any time you're creating a PR. A next common pitfall that we see with purchase requisitions, any document really, is that if you've already created a document and for whatever reason you get out of it and you want to come back in and continue to do work within it, if you see up in the top left corner that there's an edit button that is showing, you want to go ahead and select that. So a common ticket that we see is, we want to come in and add a budget reservation here. But when I do, all I see is my cancel button. That's because we're not in edit mode yet. So if I cancel out here and I select edit, now you'll see save up here. So I'm in edit mode for the whole purchase requisition, but now I could come back in. Now I have okay, and I can select a different budget reservation. I already have a budget reservation on my line, but I'm going to switch it to a different one. And if you don't add budget reservations using that line here, if you use it with the advanced select option, I would say as a best practice to leave your budget reservations off until the end, add all your other details in your line, come back to line 10 and add your budget reservations through here. Hopefully this one has enough funding on it. Since I already had a budget reservation in there, it's going to ask me if I want to replace it. I'm going to say yes. And when I add it to line 1 there, once I've added it to one line, I can select budget reservation lines again and select copy budget reservations to other lines. Now again, because I've already populated these other 3 lines with it, I'm going to get this question 3 times. But yes, I want to replace it. So I just added a budget reservation to 4 lines. So if you are otherwise going through each line, each line and using your advanced selection option and doing it line by line by line, maybe start using budget reservation lines and these 2 features to help you get there. The other thing I wanted to mention is delivery address also works that same way. And it's important because if you're going to add attention information, you can add attention information to just one line. You'll get that same prompt again. But then you can also copy it to your other 3 lines. Copying it to your other 3 lines is important because if your attention information is different from any one of those 4 lines when you go to create your PO, it's not going to put your attention information at the header level. It's going to say see line level for details. So that is an easy way to make sure that your address is the same, your attention information is the same for all 4 lines. Okay, here's your requested date right here. So this, I believe, is what is ultimately going to dictate and drive your delivery date. So if I let this just default to yesterday's date when I had created this PR, it's going to say my requested date or my delivery date for my goods is going to be, you know, yesterday. And that's not accurate for our vendors. So we want to give an accurate idea, or at least a good idea and time frame of when we would like to have these goods received. It's just it's helpful for the vendors, and it's more accurate for our RFQs. So I'm going to perform a budget check real quick because I have changed my PR or my GVR. And I apologize for taking a few minutes there, but I wanted to run over some of those little quick points with PRs. Cheryl, I think I saw some comments from you and Tom. Was there anything that I missed or need to highlight here before jumping into the RFQ?
No, one thing I wanted to say, you know, you kind of demonstrated the budget reservation lines and adding, you know, to one line and then copying it to the others, which is completely valid. There was a comment in the notes here that, of course, you can add the GVRs to all lines at the same time by selecting all the lines and then choosing your, you know, budget reservation lines and adding a GVR. That's completely valid as well. So I think we're just demonstrating one approach to adding that information.
Yep, is valid, correct, and absolutely valid. Wanted to show how both functionalities can work. So maybe if you've added it to one, and then you can take it to others or select for other ones. But yes, that you can highlight multiple different lines within this grid and copy to that. So I've got my reason code is populated. So the question is needed as soon as possible for a requested date. If that's truly accurate, I would say probably, you know, that's a follow-up question. Maybe we'll talk with procurement, but something that you would want to note in any of your details within your RFQ. So if your products are needed immediately, that's probably something we want to put in specifications or in our product description or our RFQ description when we go to put that out to bid.
Yeah, and Kyle, while you're submitting, a couple other questions or comments that came through. One is just, you know, wanted to stress that the reason code that you're selecting at the top, you know, the reason that is so critically important is because that is what determines what workflow it goes through, right? So whether it's purchase for contract or you're selecting the request for quotation for department or procurement level, you know, that's actually how the system is going to route it through. So that's why it's so critical that those reason codes are selected, and why your PR will get rejected if you don't have a reason code there. So that was one thing. There was also a question on, can the financial checks be done on all lines instead of individually? Absolutely. That would be what I would recommend to do first and foremost. Add all your lines, add your financial information, and then from the top or the bottom in the line area, you can actually do your financial check on all the lines at once. So yes, I would definitely recommend that. And then also there's another question here, Kyle. I'm not sure that you touched on this yet, and this is kind of a known issue in the system, right? When you create a PR and you are selecting a procurement category, the system by default, if it finds a purchase agreement that's in a vendor that's associated with that procurement category, that will actually auto-populate into your purchase requisition. And so the question is, you know, should we leave that PA number and vendor information populated on the PR? Absolutely not, right? If you're doing a request for quotation, you 100% want to make sure that that information is removed. And I think I see it on your line 4 there, so that might be where why that question you know, came about. But no, that's a super valid point. The reason that the system does this, we'd love for it not to do this, right? The reason that it does this has to do with our purchase from contract or catalogs, right? So unfortunately, in order for that to work properly, it unfortunately will populate this PA and vendor all the time. We did evaluate whether we could change that. Unfortunately, right now we can't. So that was a good call out. You know, absolutely make sure you're removing that information. It will cause issues downstream, especially for RFQs if you do not.
If you have ever logged a tech desk ticket and told me you have removed the vendor in the purchase agreement and it showed back up, I believe you. But yes, as Cheryl said, you want to have that removed. So.
Yeah, and then last thing,
so
real quick, Kyle. I apologize. I don't know if you have already submitted this. You have. Can you just kind of point to how someone would check all the financial dimensions at once rather than individually? So I think that's referring to kind of the option at the top.
Yep. So I kind of did it real quick there and didn't really talk through it quickly there. But if we go up to the top ribbon and we select financials, you don't have to highlight or select any lines in the grid. You can just select perform budget check. If your budget check's successful, you're not going to see any kind of notification other than your check marks on your lines. Since I already had the check marks, I'm not going to get anything. Obviously, if you don't pass, you would see an error in the red ribbon with additional information as to why you didn't pass the budget check. Okay. Once we sorry, go ahead, Cheryl.
Nope, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I think we're all caught up on questions now.
Okay. So we've created our PR. It's been submitted to workflow. Once we submit to workflow, we can just move to our purchase requisitions tab here, and we can create our request for quotation straight from our purchase requisition here. When we select request for quotation, we want to make sure that our buying legal entity is COLS. We do need to highlight all of our lines for our RFQ. If we don't highlight these, they won't be included when we create the RFQ. So it is possible to create multiple different RFQs from your PR. But what we would like to do is include all 4 of these lines in one single RFQ. We selected the header, it selects all 4 of them for us. So you'll see here in the blue ribbon, it says this RFQ has been created and you have your RFQ number. But if you look under related information, there is also a field for request for quotation. If you use the refresh button up here in the top right corner, it'll populate that RFQ and provide a hyperlink for you. So then you can select that hyperlink to open up your RFQ. As I mentioned, when you're creating a PR, so because this RFQ has now been created before we had gotten into it or we opened it up, we're not in edit mode. So we want to select edit here in the top left corner to make sure that we can input into our documents. Because we created from a PR, all of our line information should match what we inputted in our purchase requisition, with the product description being in here in the text, any unit price, quantity, or unit that we had entered in at the line level, those details should all come over and populate here in our RFQ. You'll see here that my requested date, my PR was 4/29. My delivery date here now in my RFQ is also 4/29. Even though I'm in edit mode, is it going to let me adjust it? I think it might let me adjust it. So it will let me adjust here. But we can also, so that's going to change it for me at my line levels. So we can adjust here as the delivery date as well, but we can also get started at our purchase requisition level if we want consistency. and then we won't have to adjust here in the RFQ. We see our expiration date and time, but we can also move to our header to adjust this. So a lot of the work that we're going to do within an RFQ is going to be done at the header level. So we'll come into our header level, keeping in mind this is an informal bid. So we'll change our solicitation type from IFB to INF for an informal quote. From today's date, the 3/9 will come back, and maybe we'll leave it until Friday the 18th. And it's going to ask if I want to update the expiration date for lines within the RFQ. And yes, the answer is yes, I want the expiration date to be consistent across all of my lines. So now I've got roughly, 9 days before this will expire. So I know that I've satisfied the 5-day requirement for informal bids. I want to come up and I want to enter in, and this is kind of redundant, but there's a requesting department, and then right below it, there is department. But I do want to enter in both of those. You do want to select at the department level for the department, even though that is a division number ultimately. So as we keep working through here, we'll see our delivery date again. Since I did it in the line view, but it was in the header, it did take it, and we did update everything. So it is copied over to our header. The document title, so, I've got training, create RFQ. This is going to come from your PR. You can adjust it. For me, this is good, but you want it to be descriptive. You want vendors to be able to get an idea of what the RFQ is going to have for them before they get into the description or the line level details. We are not going to add a scoring panel to this. We are going to allow, alternates on our line. And then for this one, I do want to allow vendor questions, and I'm going to allow vendor questions to be asked through next Monday at, we'll say lunchtime. For my description, I don't know if you guys saw, but it's just various cleaning supplies for our office. So bidder guidance here, we can add any number of documents that we have available to us. You will see this prompt will come up if you switch from the IFB, so an invitation for bids, which is our formal bids, to an informal bid or INF. So, ultimately you can choose any of these. I don't think there's a wrong answer. There's just the electronic Q&A that is in there. I'll just keep adding, keep existing. And you could add something like workers' comp, general liability, any required bidding guidance items that may be needed based on the type of RFQ that you're putting out. I'm going to stop right here, or we'll stop here. I want to talk a little bit about vendors before we add them, and then add our attachments and publish one real quick. So I'm going to jump back to this. So I mentioned vendor maintenance and cleanup. So over the last probably month or so, it's gone quickly. We had encountered a couple of hiccups where we're running into some issues with getting email communication to vendors, especially around RFQs. And the city strives to maintain a large and diverse vendor pool. As we said earlier, the reason to get the best price best use of public funds and provide, the most fair and equitable opportunity for the vendors in the process. And what that meant for us is that we had about 6,000 accounts within vendor accounts within our pool. And what we've been trying to do is identify any of the inactive or non-responsive vendors or ones that may not have a valid email address anymore, and to place those in a hold all status. This is going to leave us with our active and engaged vendor pool, and it's going to help kind of improve and streamline communication for us as users as we're trying to get our RFQs out to vendors who may be interested in providing a bid for them. So what this really means for us as users right now, there's two primary things. The first is that we're asking users to only add vendors to their RFQ when you're ready to publish your RFQ to the portal. So we know that, that it doesn't always happen that you create your RFQ and it gets published right away. There may be a day or two, or it may be a week or two before that RFQ gets finished and sent to the portal. And in that time, we're actively working to put vendors on a hold all status. New vendors may be signing up or updating their profile and becoming active again. So it's a fluid, dynamic situation with our vendors, and we want you to wait until the very, right at the end before we send it to the portal. That way, you have the most up-to-date vendor pool when you go to send your RFQ out for email notifications. We'll touch on the second part as we get into amending and canceling RFQs as well. And in a normal state and not too far in the distant future, our RFQ notifications will, or email notifications will go to vendors when you amend or cancel an RFQ, but currently that is not the case. So we're going to ask for your assistance with that as well. We'll talk about those both as we amend and cancel the RFQ. Cheryl, do you have anything to add to this right now, or anything to correct that I've said?
No, only to say, thank you for everyone's patience as we got through that. I would dare say it was about the worst time of the year to encounter that issue. It did take a while to work through. We are making great strides. So I feel good moving forward. And I guess I'll leave it at that.
Okay. So we're going to jump back in and add our vendors here real quick. I did want to highlight this, and this is not something I'm going to demonstrate here when we jump back in, but you can look for and search and add vendors through our vendor search function. You can do that by procurement category. You can do it by vendor certification. So if you're looking for, an MBE certified vendor, that is something that you could search for and try to add vendors or have vendors added to your system. You can also see in my screenshot there that it's for not blocked for all. So you can even work to exclude those vendors who may have been placed on that hold all status in our maintenance and cleanup initiative. But again, I'm not going to demonstrate this today. We may look to put out a brief job aid or maybe a brief sub video that demonstrates this if we get enough interest from the users. The other way to add them, you can auto add vendors and you can add them manually. I'll show you both of these here real quick. Just not to harp on the point, but also to drive it home. Whether you're doing one or the other, auto add or add manually, please do not add vendors until you are ready to publish your RFQ. It'll just be really helpful, and it will also ensure that you get the most up-to-date and accurate vendor pool. I will say as a note, if you auto add vendors, the auto add feature is going to exclude any vendor that we have placed or that has been placed in a hold all status. If you add a vendor manually, you may end up adding one that is on hold all, and if you do that, you'll see an error message. So that's just something to keep in mind, and then they won't be added to your RFQ. So let's we'll cover this, I guess, real quick with sending and publishing an RFQ. We do see a significant number of amendments that happen to RFQs, maybe because we've missed some details when we were reviewing them, or maybe we forgot to set, our attachment restriction from internal to external. So we want to be very careful before we submit the RFQs to give them one real good once over, a good look, and make sure that we have everything the way we want it before we publish it. When we do publish an amendment, two things can happen, or two things do happen. The first is if a vendor has submitted a bid, that bid gets returned to the vendor and their pricing gets erased from the bid. So if the vendors put in work, we end up sending their bid back to them just because we did something we could have caught on the front end. That can be frustrating for a vendor. So just important to do our best to try to catch all these on the front end, and we'll take a once over and look at them as we get in there.
And Kyle, just a quick note for the vendors. Tom pointed out, just to kind of connect the dots here, that vendor hold all in D365 is synonymous with inactive, right? We're basically inactivating these vendors. So just wanted to mention that to make it clear.
Yep. Okay. So we're back here. We are in our header view, our header tab, and we've rolled down to the vendor, to our vendor tab here within our header view. We can't send this to the RFQ to the vendor portal without adding some vendors. So I'm going to add a few vendors here that I know that we use, our test accounts. And this is a test environment, so I've added my emails back in for these accounts. When I do the auto add vendors, the emails are not going to show up here. If you auto add vendors, or when you auto add vendors, if you do notice any missing email accounts here and you want to remove that vendor from your pool, that can assist and help make sure that your communication will get out there a little quicker, and we're not sending emails or trying to not send emails. We're just including a vendor that is not going to get notified for their bid. But I did that a little quick. So if you want to manually add a vendor, you just go to the add button. It will give you a brand new line. So if you don't know the vendor's account number, but you know the name, you can't search for the name in the line, but if you use the down arrow on the vendor account, you can filter and search on any one of these columns in here. So then you can use the down arrow on the name. Just a reminder, I always use contains. Contains is, it helps, it's like a general search feature. So even though I may know the specific vendor account that I want to look for, I can use contains and put something in there that I know it has within there, and it'll pull up all of them. It's a more general, all-inclusive search feature. And then I'll add one more that I do know this one. So if you know the number, you can just type it in. Oh, I thought I knew it. Maybe I don't. I didn't know it. I did know it. It was too slow for me. Okay, so we've got two of them in there. And then if I want to auto add vendors, when you auto add vendors, it's auto adding vendors that have signed up for the procurement categories that are used in your RFQ. For this specific RFQ, if I went back to my lines, it's cleaning supplies and equipment. So any vendor that has signed up for cleaning supplies and equipment, if I select auto add vendors, it is going to work to add them to the vendor notification list and create a bid for them where they can log into the vendor portal and bid on the product or on the RFQ and product. So it did take a moment to load because there are a significant number of vendors here that you can see that have been added to this for notification. They don't have email addresses again because this is in our test environment. And I know this is going to be a little weird, but because they don't have email addresses, if I try to publish to the vendor portal, this will take a number of minutes for us if I don't remove these vendors. So I'm going to take a second to remove vendors. I should have thought of that ahead of time, and I'll add my 2 vendors back in real quick with my email addresses. While we're waiting for those to clear, let's touch on amendments real quick. So we're going to finish up by placing an attachment on our RFQ, and we're going to publish it to the vendor portal. I am purposely going to leave the internal restriction or the restriction set to internal. So we're going to need to amend our RFQ. I did touch on what amending an RFQ will do. The most important thing is that issuing an amendment does remove all pricing and return submitted bids to the vendors. You know, common reasons that we're doing it, we forgot to add an attachment or we didn't set the attachment restriction to external. Maybe we need to extend the expiration date and time of the RFQ. We've decided to make updates to our specifications and or, you know, potentially the quantity of goods or services that we're requesting. One thing that's very important is that when we do an amendment, we want to make sure that we always put a name and a description in the amendment when we are creating it and then pushing it to the portal. And the reason is, if we've made an amendment to an RFQ, we want to let the vendors know why. It can be very short description, a very short name and description. You know, name amendment number 1, description, extended expiration date 2, you know, and put the new date and time, or just extended expiration date. This will just help the vendors understand, you know, what has been amended, and help give them direction to what they might need to look at that might differ from the original RFQ that was published. So I did mention, you know, the golden state, or what will happen in the not too distant future is that when you amend an RFQ, that will notify vendors that an amendment has occurred, but currently that does not occur. So what we need help from with the users is if you were going to make an amendment to an RFQ that you have published, we need you to look in Manage Replies and see if you have received, or you can look at your RFQ to see if you have received any bids. If you have received a bid or bids from vendors, what we need you to do is to notify those vendors that those bids have been returned, and they're going to need to rebid or log back into vendor services and resubmit their bid on the RFQ due to an amendment. With that in mind, I think we should be done here. So we are. Add my 2 back in really quick. So check my address, make sure that it came over correctly from my RFQ or from my PR. I have my description in. Now, I would put maybe more descriptive, a better description in here if this was not just a demonstration. Might let the vendor know the various type of products that I'm purchasing, you know, the Clorox or, you know, say hand sanitizer, sanitizing wipes, and you know, sanitation machine, or try to give the vendor as much information as you can within your description. But I've done everything I need to do except my attachments. So important, again, even if you attach at the line level, it is possible for a vendor to find your attachment, but we want to attach at the header level. This is going to make it the easiest for the vendor. I saw that question from Sherry, and we can, I can show you how that, how we can look at that in a second. Sherry asked if bids were received, how can we tell who submitted a bid? So I'll show that here in a second, or as we get towards that, but good question. So I'm in the header level. I go up to the paperclip to make my attachment. I am going to purposefully leave it internal because that'll help us show what needs to happen with the amendment. But so I leave it as internal on a mistake, and I come in here and I send it to the portal, and I publish my RFQ. Not necessary to do that. So once I publish that, and that happened really quick because I just have 2 vendors and we're in a test environment. So I published it. I can see that my status is changed under vendors to sent. Before I did that, I apologize for not highlighting it if you happen to catch it. When I added these vendors, the lowest status was created, the highest status was created. To the question that was asked, and there's a better way to look and see this, but if a bid was received, this lowest status would now change to, or I'm sorry, the highest status would now change to received. So you would see here that bids have been received, but there's another way to see that, and I will show you what that is here in a second. But that is one way to also see that. However, to know that your RFQ has been published, you'll see sent and sent. And we know that it has gone to the vendor services portal. I'm not going to jump and show that, but maybe, you know, after we've published our RFQ, we have now realized, or a vendor has said, hey, we don't see an attachment for the bid specification. And you jump in there and you say, oh man, I forgot to set it to external. So we need to create an amendment so we can put our product specification attachment back into our RFQ. So to do this, we're going to create an amendment in the header. So we open up our RFQ. In my case, I didn't close it. But if I did, and I opened up my RFQ, you know, we still just check to make sure that we're in edit mode. I am, and I'm going to create my amendment. I'm sorry, was there a question or comment? Okay. So when you create your amendment, or when you say create an amendment, this will change to, you can either cancel your amendment or you can finalize your amendment. That's how you know that you have one open. You want to be in your header view, and you want to scroll down to the amendment tab. So here in the amendment tab, here's your name and description. So for this one, I'm going to name it amendment number 1.
Yes.
Okay.
So I can't just hit
And my
save.
description is attachment for project product specification.
Where I just enter the regular line.
Could everyone check real quick, see if you guys are on
You mean the
mute?
offset?
I think
Yeah.
there might be someone who is not currently on mute.
It will. It'll
Yeah.
keep the same dates.
I'm trying to see who that is, but everyone looks like they're on mute.
Sean said it's Mandy. He just in the chat.
Mandy. Ah, there we go. Okay, go ahead, Kyle.
Okay, perfect. So I've created my amendment. I put my name in. I put my description. What I want to do is that I want to attach my attachments. I cannot come back up to, and it doesn't look like it actually took it, but I cannot come back up here and I could not change my restriction to external on the document that I have already attached and then hit save, get out, and then finalize my amendment. If I do that, it's not going to push that document to the vendor services portal. It's not going to attach it to the RFQ, and there's still no way that vendors are going to see that. So you cannot alter, edit the restriction once it's been attached, okay? So what we want to do is we want to attach our attachments down here at the amendment line level. And that's how vendors are going to be able to see it. So keep that in mind if you're trying to, this time I am going to set to external. Okay, so keep that in mind. If you forget to set your restriction to external, or if you forget to attach something and you create an amendment for it, please keep that with the amendments and at the line level, and it should, and it will show up with your amendment for vendors to see. If you want to see if a bid has been received, so let's say this has been sitting for a few days. If I come up to manage replies, and I would select on manage replies, you can look in here to see if a bid has been submitted. Since I only have these two bids, it's easy for me to see through here. So that is one way that we can see, you know, if a bid has been received. And I believe that status will change here as well for received if the bid has been received by the vendor already as well. And Cheryl, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I do believe it shows up in changes in requests for quotation journals as well.
It does. And would you like me to do enter in a quote real quick so that you can demonstrate that?
Sure. Or actually, here, I'll do it. This will be maybe slightly interesting. So if you've ever wondered what vendors may see, on their end, so vendor logs in, this is what a vendor is going to see for their landing page, you know, very similar to what we see when we log in, but different tiles for them to choose, but they would be in vendor bidding. So because they were included in the RFQ, they got sent a bid invitation and they have a bid created for them. So they would create, or they would select their bid here. Come up and bid. scroll down. So they cannot input on quantity or unit, but they can input their unit price. Actually, well, yeah. I was going to attach something, but we're going to finalize the amendment, and this will get invalidated anyway. So you'll see we now have 2 bids received. Cheryl had gotten in there, and so that's a good example of that vendor was not invited by us, but they maybe saw it out on the vendor services portal, and they decided they wanted to submit a bid, and they did. And then I did as well, just there. So you would have likely have an email address, you know, in production for this vendor, and you can follow up with the vendors that way. But if we look at requests for quotation, you'll see that there were also, you'll see instances for both, right? So when they were sent and when they were received by this vendor in these cases. So I think you can, yeah, so we can sort on received as well to give you the full list.
Yeah, and Kyle, I will say the advantage of looking at it in the vendor list, unless you can add email here, is that you'll see the email address too. Now, the disadvantage is that you can't filter by status. So there's kind of good and bad in both scenarios.
Yep. Okay, so I've made my attachment. You know, we're going to finalize our amendment and send it on to the vendor services portal. This is going to tell you we are invalidating the bids, you know, and send the amended RFQ to invited. And currently, you know, this notification email is not going to go out. So we've asked users to turn this off and to follow up individually. So this is where we're gonna go ahead for now. We're gonna say let's toggle this to no, and we're gonna follow up with the users or with the vendors that submitted the bid. So we see there's 3 vendors here, but we know that only 2 of them submitted the bid. What we're asking of users is that you follow up with the ones that submitted the bids. If a vendor has not submitted a bid yet, when they go to look at your RFQ, they can see the amendment, or they should see the amendment when they do. But if they have submitted a bid, these are the 2 vendors we want to follow up with. But we'll toggle no for this. In the future, this will be on for yes. You do want to give a reason for your amendment. You know, again, added product specifications. You know, please rebid, something like that. You know, because now that they have those specifications, it could materially impact what their bid price might be on your RFQ. But we'll hit next, and we'll finish.
And Kyle, I may have missed it, but did you show where in the RFQ to add the name for the amendment in the description?
Yes.
I think you may have when you did the attachment. Okay, cool. Thank you.
And so again, that's just important because if we leave these blank, and we leave these blank now, this is not going to show up on the vendor portal. And it's just something we want to provide the most information we can to the vendors, so we get them to a point where they can give us an accurate bid and their best bid for the RFQ. So this is something that I don't think that users are widely doing today. And on a lot of our RFQs for goods, maybe there isn't a need for vendor questions and answers, but We do want to handle all vendor questions and answers through D365 when you want to allow questions. We shouldn't instruct vendors to send questions that are related to your RFQ to vendor services or to your individual email account. We want to just handle all questions, have them submitted through the application and all of our answers go out. That will ensure that all vendors are seeing the questions and seeing the answers that could impact their bids. So it's important to note that you make sure that the direct response field is set to no. If you have it toggled to yes, it's only going to reply to the vendor that asked that question. So I believe we've recently changed this and it should default to no, but just keep that in mind and keep an eye on it. And if you were to ever select yes, it's only going to go directly to the vendor that asked the question, and we don't necessarily, or we don't want to do that. Doing this, right, so providing responses to your vendor questions is not going to return or invalidate any bids that are already submitted. The question and answers through D365 are timestamped, right? So it's a vendor's responsibility, and when a vendor submits a bid, it will tell them with a notification that they can recall their bid up until the expiration of the RFQ. So if a vendor asks a question or a vendor receives an answer, then they can go back in, they can recall their bid, they could alter it if there is something that they see in those question and answers that would alter their bid. So let's jump back in. So just to reinforce the point, I opened a purchase requisition that has previously been created. I can't do anything in it until I hit the edit button up top. So I hit the edit button. Now I could have opened up what I'm about to open up, but if you're ever trying to make any kind of changes to a document that's in draft but has been previously open, that's what we want to do. So make sure we hit edit. So I created this PR, and then from this PR, I created an RFQ that is sitting out there. You can see I messed up and I didn't change my delivery date, but this one doesn't close until Friday, and there's been some questions that I need to answer for vendors around my RFQ. So you'll see if you've enabled question and answers for your RFQ, you can click into this question and answers hyperlink. It's under quotation, replies, question and answer. There's a couple things with question and answers. So we can group questions that are similar to each other. So we only have to answer the question one time instead of 3 times. And then we can also, but then on the flip side of this is we can only send answers to one question at a time. We can put all the answers in here, but we can't send the answers. Once we select more than one row, it grays out our ability to send or revert answers. So you can put your information in, but you can only select one row at a time. So keep that in mind. When you go to respond to questions that vendors have, you can put all your information in, you can only send them one at a time. So when I look at this, I can see my first 3 questions are all around, I apologize, I should have done this a while ago, are all around Purell. So one of my lines was for Germex hand sanitizer, and I want to use Purell. Make sure I hit my edit button, or it looks like these vendors want to use Purell. So if I want to respond to this question, these 3 questions, I want to group them together and only answer, these 3 questions one time. What you do is you assign a group code to the similar question. The group code can be anything you want. 1, 2, 3, 1, a numeral, a letter, I would do something easy. It doesn't have to be complex. And then you only answer it one time, but you do have to put a group question, because although these are similar, you know, they all are a little different. So my group question is, or can we substitute Purell? My group answer is going to be yes.
And Kyle, I just want to point out, you know, you're kind of entering it in the grid at the top, which is completely fine. You can actually enter it at the bottom too, where the boxes are a little bit bigger.
Yep. I was going to say, so direct response is here, where you could technically add or put there. But if you come down to the bottom here, you'll see direct response where you could toggle, but we don't want to. We're leaving it at no. And as Cheryl said, if you have a longer question, longer answer, or you just want to enter into here, you have a larger text space here at the bottom to enter those into. So I'm going to move through here. I want to bid a backpack sprayer with hypochlorite acid. So I had said a handheld. So direct response, because this one is not like any other of them, is no, must be handheld. One of them was 120 ounces of full sand. They want 256 of half sand. No. And they want to give us the green bottle of Clorox wipes instead of yellow. So, sure. But important to note, you know, a single answer, so not a grouped question, not multiple questions grouped into one group question and one group answer. We just answer in our answer thing, and these are grayed out. We can't answer in them anyhow. If you answer a group code question and group answer, don't fill in the answer as well, just the group answer. So I have all these questions answered. One vendor submitted a question that was blank. You don't have to respond to it, but again, if I tried to grab all of these, I gray out my send answers. So we'll do it one at a time. When you do your group questions, your group codes, you just select the first one and the one that you entered the group question and the group answer in. You could have entered that information into any of the 3 lines, but you only do it one time. It's going to ask if you want to send it directly to the vendors in the group or send it to all vendors. Direct response is no, and we want to leave it that way. Tells us that it was published successfully, and then I'll just work my way down the list. This is the vendor now can come back into their bid. And the vendor now can have the same question and answer, you know, kind of hyperlink that we saw. And they can see all the answers. Any questions around question and answers through the application or specifically? I will say, if there is a question on it, you cannot enter questions. So a user cannot enter questions. I don't know if that was asked, but I think that's been a common one, is if for some reason, you know, you thought of a question that might be helpful to all vendors, you can't input a question and then answer it. Sorry,
yeah,
Cheryl.
there's been just a few questions. I've answered those through the chat, so I think we're okay. And Kyle, did you mention that, you know, question and answers truly should be done inside of D365? So if you have a practice of sending to a city email or anything like that, you know, from guidance with procurement and the procurement manager, question and answers should be taken care of, you know, through your RFQ.
Yep, we covered that, and definitely, you know, that is what we would like to. That is the best practice. That's what we want to do is handle everything through D365, and again, it timestamps when they were received. It timestamps your response, and then it ensures that your response is able to be seen by any vendor who would log in and look at our RFQ.
Okay, and Kyle, you're starting to crackle a little. I don't know if you're on a headset or you might just shift to the left.
Hey, am I any better?
Still a little crackly.
Did that make it any better?
Slightly.
Okay. Let's hope that improves. I think I went from headphones to speaker, but I think that's the best I can offer.
Okay.
And I moved my phone to the other side of the room.
All right, go ahead. I'll let you know if it becomes indistinguishable. Hopefully it'll clear up here in a second.
Okay. If we need to cancel an RFQ for any reason, so if we've decided that the RFQ that we put out to bid is no longer needed, maybe it was in error and it can't, or it would cause too much confusion if we were to try to amend it or put out an amendment. We want to cancel that RFQ. We do not want it to sit out there until its expiration date. We don't want vendors looking at an RFQ that are or performing work on an RFQ that isn't going to be awarded. And then also, we want to be as accurate as possible. We don't want an RFQ that should have been canceled to look like it wasn't and to maintain an open record. But important of note, only the creator of the RFQ should really cancel the RFQ unless they've been instructed to by that individual user. But when we're canceling an RFQ, much like when we are amending an RFQ, we want to provide the reason for the cancellation, especially if we have received bids on that RFQ. So the RFQ number and title are going to show in an email to the user, but there won't be any other information. So we want to provide provide a reason for the cancellation to the vendor. Much like amendments, currently, if you cancel an RFQ, D365 is not going to notify those vendors who have submitted bids that they have been returned in the event of that cancellation. So if you're canceling an RFQ and you see that a vendor has submitted a bid, we're asking users to identify those vendors, to reach out to them and let them know that that RFQ has been canceled. Okay, so we'll jump in here, answer these questions, then we realize maybe we don't need the cleaning supplies. We came back to the office and we found out that we still had a bunch of them, so we don't need anything anymore. What we're going to do here then is I'm just going to cancel my RFQ. So it's going to ask me, it's going to tell me I'm going to cancel these bids if I do that, and then I can notify the vendors by email. In the future, yes, we're going to send a notification through D365. It is going to let the vendors know that this RFQ has been canceled. You would enter your reason for cancellation down here, let them know why that has occurred. We are not going to send this currently. We're asking your assistance that if the bid has been received, that you would reach out to the vendor and let them know the RFQ has been canceled. Canceling is pretty quick, pretty straightforward, and pretty easy. Since this has been canceled, I'll close that out. So we're going to review some RFQs. We're going to unseal bids, we're going to review the replies, and we're going to award to the vendor. So just important to note, you cannot unseal bids prior to the expiration date. You cannot view bids prior to the expiration date. You can see what vendors have bid, though, as we've shown previously for amending and canceling of a slide. What we are going to show when we unseal and award these is that multiple vendors can be awarded for one single RFQ. With that in mind, you have to award one vendor at a time. So you can't split the 4 lines into the vendors that you want and then do it all at once. You have to do them one at a time. We're going to show that process here. So once a vendor bid is accepted for a line, that line cannot be updated. So we can't award it to a different vendor. We can't unaward it to the vendor that has received it. It's been awarded to that vendor. So we want to make sure that's who we want to award to before we award it. And then once it's awarded, that's pretty final. So it is final. Previously, and this was at the beginning of DAC's 2012 implementation, there was guidance to users to leave or not reject other bids in the event that we could go back and award it if a vendor wasn't going to be able to fulfill their bid. That is not the case. So please do not do that. We want to award or accept a bid, and then we want to reject all other bids. So we don't want to leave an RFQ with open accepted bids, or I'm sorry, open received bids. We want those to get rejected. So we'll show that as well. But best practice, we always want to accept and reject every bid that we receive on an RFQ. Again, just best practice, and I don't have to do this because I'm not going to be editing any of my lines, but I've opened a document that has previously been created. If I did want to edit it, I want to click edit in the top left corner. But this RFQ's expiration date has come and passed. I did receive some bids, and I can tell this because my statuses are received. And I'm going to unseal my bids. Bid lines and quantities are going to become visible. Yep. I do believe there was a question about batch processing. Cheryl, I don't know if that was addressed or if you want to address that, if the user should use it. I'm not going to use it here in this test environment in this case.
Yeah, there was a question earlier, actually, when you published the RFQ about whether to do it in batch. We definitely would recommend doing it in batch, especially if you have a larger number of vendors. Kyle, I know you didn't do it in batch just because, you only had 2 vendors. In this case, you also had a very small number of vendors, so you just did it in what's called the interactive mode. But yeah, you're always more than welcome to do it in batch. The benefit of doing it in batch as well is if there is an issue when you're either unsealing or when you're publishing your RFQ, that batch job does have a log in it. So if something goes wrong and
you need to reach out to us for help, we actually have somewhere that we can go and kind of look at what happens. So that's kind of the benefit there of unsealing or even publishing in a batch mode.
So once you unseal your bids and they unseal successfully, you're not going to be able to unseal again. That will go away, and then you're going to be able to compare your replies. Now, it was later at night last night when I did this, and I forgot to attach or to put a note in with one of my lines that said, please check attachment for one of these bids. But we can review this. This is an overview of your bids. This is not going to have all of the details that a bid that was submitted by a vendor will actually have. So if we can't make a decision based off of the price, or there is a comment where you need to see an attachment, or there was an alternate that you need to compare specs, we need to get into the vendor's bid to see more. So we can't do that from here. Compare replies is where we're going to accept, reject the bids that we've received, but we need to see a little bit more about those bids. I could do it if I go to header and I scroll down here to my vendor and I scroll over to my bid, and I can select the bid here. However, this gets messy because we can't sort on status. So this gets messy when you have a huge list of vendors. So the best thing to do would be go up to Request for Quotation Journals, and you can see what was received. Now, you're seeing received multiple times, or much more than the number one, because it's at the line level. I'm sorry, it's not at the line level there. It's showing each time it went out there and came in. And then also when I sent it out and when it came back in. But all these bids are the same for each two. So you just want to select one of those bids. When you do that, you're opening the bid that the vendor submitted. This is where you're going to get their bid attachments. So if a vendor had submitted a bid, so if Tester 620 told me they wanted an alternate for line 10 and to check my attachments, this is where I would go to see, and the attachment would show up here. Again, I forgot to attach something, and I apologize for that. But this is where you're going to see bid attachments if a vendor has attached it. We're not going to see them up here in the, I think you may be able to actually see it here. Since I have not attached it, you won't see that. But you will not be able to see your attachments in compare replies. You have to go into the individual bid itself if you want to see an attachment or any of the other greater details that you may see. If they've put something in with an item description and not just the product name, you'll be able to see item description, delivery details, information like that. So I do my review on this individual RFQ, and I've noticed that I have a number of bids that have been submitted, and I want to award 3 of the 4 lines, but to different vendors. So for lines 10 and 20, I want to award it to the first vendor. Line 30 is going to end up being awarded to, and I do this right. Line 30 is going to be awarded to the last vendor, and then I'm not going to award line 40 just because of the prices, and it doesn't fit the budget that we had for that individual piece of equipment. So I've highlighted the 2 lines that I want to award to just the first vendor. Again, we can't award to each, or we can't award to multiple vendors at the same time. We have to do it one by one. So I've highlighted the 2 lines, and I click accept. You want to verify that it's the correct vendor that you want to accept. and accept those 2 lines, you want to hit OK.
And Kyle, while this is processing, just a time check for you. You have about a half an hour left. And then there is a question here. It says, are the bid line attachment and bid attachment different? Can you speak to that?
They should all, I want to say they should all show up in under that bid attachments for you. I will do further testing, and if that is incorrect, will make sure that Cheryl puts out some communication that may say otherwise, but they should all populate under that bid attachment.
Okay.
So now the first thing that after we've accepted it, you're going to get an immediate prompt for rejecting anything else. If you hit OK here to reject it, it's going to reject everyone else's bid. So not just the lines left on this vendor, but the other 2 vendors that have also placed bids. So for now, we're going to hit cancel because we have another line that we want to award. And that's line 30. So we can see, you know, $100 here, 450 there, and then 50 here. So I'm going to click and I'm going to award my 3rd line, so line 30, and my 2nd vendor. And it's at this point that I'm done awarding any line. So I don't have any other lines left in my RFQ that I wish to award. And now I'm going to reject. So I'm going to get a prompt here for the remaining bids and remaining lines. Reject. So if I go through and I select each one of these vendors, so this first vendor, I didn't award their lines 30 and 40. I want to reject those. The second vendor, I didn't award any of their lines, so I'm going to reject all those. And the third vendor, I just awarded line 30, so I'm going to reject their other ones, and I'm going to select OK. So I'm now rejecting all the remaining bids for them. That's complete. We'll come back here. So if I go to my line level, if I click under related information, I can click my purchase requisition and it's going to open up my purchase requisition. And if I look down at my lines, it should populate with the vendors. And then it didn't populate with any vendor information for the 4th line. So that has occurred correctly. Once this has occurred, what we want to do is go up to workflow. We're going to complete our task. And then this is going to allow your PR to continue down workflow. It's going to take a second for it to update since I've already done. It will go to your department for approval. And then once it's approved, this is when you will release it to a PO, add a reason code, and then submit your PO to workflow for, again, department approval, and then potentially any other approvals in that workflow down to the auditors, and then to get a confirmed PO. Cheryl, are there any comments or questions there?
No, I think I just want to stress that, you know, we're acutely aware that that compare replies page is not the most user-friendly. Had conversations with Microsoft before. I recently spoke to them about a week and a half ago, where we continue to kind of push for a redesign on that page. So, you know, I can't promise that I'll be successful, but we are trying. We do see lots and lots of bugs, tickets that come in because people accidentally award their RFQ incorrectly. And as Kyle mentioned, once you award a line, the line is awarded. And so we can't go back and fix it. So, you know, if there's one area that I would focus on, I mean, from all of this presentation, but I mean, you know, that particular piece, you know, if you're awarding to multiple vendors, you do have to be very mindful of the process that you're moving through. And in conjunction to that, there was a question about, you know, I thought we were only supposed to reject lines if there was going to be no award for that line. That is definitely when it is most important, right? Because it does cause downstream effects. If you leave a line unawarded on your PR, once you try to move forward, then all kinds of things potentially can happen. However, to properly close out the RFQ, right, we are recommending that once you have done all of your actual awards, that on that last step, which comes up as a reject, that you go ahead and reject, right? What that does is it puts a status with every single bid that we received, whether that's accepted, whether that's rejected. And so that's kind of the proper way to fully close out the RFQ. And we, of course, don't see that happening very much today, which is why our RFQs are kind of historically a bit of a mess, right? So just moving forward, you know, incorporate those steps each and every time. They're very systematic. And if you follow them in the order that Kyle demonstrated, they do work. So that's like the best piece of advice that I can give. And then hopefully we'll be successful in working with Microsoft, and at some point they'll work with us to make that page a little bit more user-friendly. Let's see what else is coming in on the questions here.
And I will say there,
go ahead, Kyle.
I did rush that. I did not remove line 4 before so in this situation, what I should have done is, you know, line 4 should have been removed from my PR before I sent it back through the workflow. Is that correct, Cheryl? I guess that's something maybe I need to give proper guidance on when we do reject a line. So I guess that is something I'll look in greater detail and make sure that we have firm guidance on what happens when we reject a line through our PR.
Yeah, we can look at that together, and then we'll when I send out this video, we'll send out a follow-up to that. You know, I do believe that you have a couple options, right? You could actually choose to rebid line 4 on a new RFQ. That's possible from your existing PR. If you're deciding not to move forward with line 4, then within the purchase requisition, you would actually cancel line 4. I can't remember if we do that before or after we move the rest of the PR forward. So we can kind of check into that from an order standpoint, but you do have a couple options. Let's see, there are a few more questions that have come in. Do we need to go back through our old RFQs to reject those bids we didn't expect? No. You know, that's not worth your time. You're very, very busy. So, you know, just moving forward, I think that is a good approach and one that we have trained on for a while. It is very different than what we originally kind of trained on when DAX 2012 first went live, right? And we all know that stuff gets ingrained in your head. And so we kind of changed probably 3 or 4 years ago, honestly, but I think we're all kind of used to what we did when 2012 first went live. Let's see, Lori, you're mentioning that it deletes the entries when you want to go back and compare replies. Let me check into that one a little more. I was not aware of that. So I want to do some follow-up there. So I'm just making a quick note. I'll get you more information on that. When will the training documents be published on the site? So we do have a D365 training site now. We have the not only the training slides, but we also have the original training videos that were completed when D365 went live. I will share this recording as well, and we'll make that available on the training site also. In addition to that, we do have some in-application help that got delayed because of our wonderful email problem that we were mitigating. So that will be coming soon also. and that's in application help that there will be guidance on RFQs there too. Let's see, at what point can we close an RFQ that was created and awarded without a PR? I might need a little bit more detail on that one to answer that properly. Let's see, Eric, I'll reach out to you in a separate email so I can get just a little bit more detail on that. Looking for more questions. If you don't. So there's also a question, Kyle, about your line 40. It says if you do not remove line 40 as presented, will that have an effect on the RFQ? Let's see. If I understand that question correctly, I don't think we have to remove it from the RFQ. What we did do is we rejected it, right? So we're not actually going to award that to any vendors. So on the RFQ itself, we rejected, and then Kyle is displaying the purchase requisition. And so you can see that no vendor account or vendor name have populated there. And so it's at that point that I think there's a couple options, right? This is where you technically could publish another RFQ for line 4. Oh, and Mike, he says, I'm sorry, I didn't mean the PR. Gotcha. So for the PR, for line 4, you have a couple options. So Kyle has line 4 highlighted now. You can see there's a cancel right above where it says purchase requisition line. We could cancel line 4. That's one option. And from a previous comment, I have, you will have to cancel the line after you complete the PR, but before creating the PO. So if you're going in the cancel route, you would cancel that line after you complete the PR, but before you create the PO. And then the other option would be that, if you really do need to elicit other bids for this particular product, you could actually publish another RFQ. Now, I don't know that that's really, honestly, a practice that the city has used much. It is possible from a system perspective. You might find it easier just to cancel it here and maybe do, a completely different PR for it, just, to keep things clean. I think that's really just a personal preference.
From just speaking from so the important thing is, right, you can't award this to there is no vendor attached to line 4. So line 4 can't make it to a PR or to a PO. But we do want to cancel this line in the same month that we have approved the other 3 lines of our PR. So whatever the accounting date of our PR is, that month is where this line wants to be canceled. But I think it's worthwhile for Cheryl and I to talk, and I'll test, and we'll come up with what the best practice is and maybe a brief, I don't say it's a job aid, but guidance on how we should cancel lines that are not awarded from an RFQ. Cheryl, is that fair?
Yeah, and I think honestly, Roblin answered the question for us, but we'll make sure to provide that in the email that goes out so that everybody has it available also. We do have a few more minutes if there are any additional questions. Kyle, I think that was the last topic.
Yep, that's the last topic.
All right. So if you have any additional questions, feel free to type them in. I do have a couple questions written down for specific follow-up that we're not able to answer during this call.
I'll just end with, there are the common RFQs on, well, they're not on there at the moment, common RFQ errors on the screen. Not going to review them. I think I've hit on all of these multiple times, but the big thing is with RFQs, especially because they are public facing and we have vendors who could be looking at them, who could be impacted by something that we do with the RFQ, please reach out to us, log a tech desk ticket. As you can see, we don't know all of the answers, but we'll work with procurement. We'll make sure that we get everything squared away before we take action on a process that may ultimately end up invalidating your RFQ or causing you to do additional work, or potentially causing frustration for a vendor. So especially with RFQs, reach out on the front end and let us help you make sure we get it all straight before we move forward.
Yeah, and I guess one final thing I would add, Kyle, you have amendments listed on here, and, obviously, as we've mentioned several times, those emails are not going out right now, but they will go out again in the future. And when they do, one thing that we, as we've kind of worked through this email issue that we've been having, one trend that we kind of identified is that, an RFQ would get published, and then within an hour or two, an amendment would be completed on that RFQ. It wasn't just a couple, right? It was a pretty solid trend. And so I think, the slide that Kyle shared about validating that you have all your information, that is worth just taking a couple extra minutes. I mean, we know amendments are going to happen that we can't prevent. So we're definitely not saying don't do amendments, but definitely make sure that you're doing your validation to the best of your ability before you publish, because, each time we do an amendment, if you have 600 vendors on your RFQ, those 600 vendors are getting an amendment, and then they're getting amendment 2. And so it just does generate a lot of email, and, we do want to be more mindful and make sure that we're just getting communications to our vendors that they want and they are looking for. So that would be my only ask. Kyle, thank you very much for presenting today. If you think of any additional questions after our call ends, please feel free to reach out to us. There is one question that just came in. Are we still restricted on how many we can publish at a time? No. You may publish RFQs. We're back to normal as far as that goes. Emails are flowing. We are completely caught up. At one point, we were behind by 16,000 emails. I am happy to say those are caught up, and we are running smoothly, however, still monitoring heavily on a daily basis. So no restrictions as far as publishing new RFQs are concerned. Wonderful. And Kyle, unless you have anything else, I think that I'll go ahead and stop the recording, and we'll give everybody 11 minutes back of their day.
It works for me. I'm sick of hearing myself talk. I'm sure they're sick of hearing me talk. Thank you all for your time. Please reach out if you have any questions.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.